much. Thank you all for being here today. And it's my honor to have the opportunity to present to you with my perspective on ransomware. As Mike mentioned, I spent 20 years with the FBI. For most of my career, I was involved in white collar crime. Wait, that doesn't sound right. I investigated white collar crime. I wasn't involved in white collar crime, but one major component of white collar crime, which is basically defined as a non-violent crime, is cybercrime. And a specific type of cybercrime that's plaguing us today and only getting worse is ransomware. And we'll talk about that in today's presentation. So sometimes the national media asks me to do television interviews. This is a screenshot of one of those interviews I did on CNBC after a ransomware attack. And I got the idea for the title for this program, Why the FBI Can't Stop Ransomware, from a question that the host asked of me. She said, why can't the FBI stop it? And the answer is, well, I'll explain that in just a second, but you only have a couple minutes on these shows. You can't get into all the things that we can do to stay safe. Today, we're going to have a little bit more time. But the reason why the FBI can't stop cybercrime in most cases is because the people responsible for these crimes are not within the jurisdiction of the FBI. Most of them are in foreign countries. And if you look at some of the people from the FBI's most wanted list, 30 of the top most wanted criminals for cyber crimes, you can just look at these names and look at the wanted posters to go with them if you went on the website, and you can tell they're not within the United States, not within the jurisdiction of the FBI. Several of them are even in military uniforms, which gives you an indication they're not going to be extradited to the United States from the countries where they work in the military. Why would Russia send a member of their military over to the United States or China or North Korea when that is their job? So most of the criminals that are committing these attacks are not within the jurisdiction of the FBI. Some are being protected by their countries. And even if they're off work and not working for the military, they can use the skills that they've obtained working for the military for their own personal gain. This is the situation that we're facing today. Just take a look at one of these guys. This is a guy from Iran. Mr. Hadarian is, if you look at his wanted poster, I'll just blow up some of the things he's responsible for. Lots of malicious cyber activity, as well as just things like defacing websites, stealing sensitive data, and then victimizing individuals with credit cards, stealing their credit card information. So not only guy's a national security threat, but he's a nuisance to us personally as well. And they're all just kind of like that. So they work for their countries, they commit espionage attacks, they commit hacking attacks for the countries, and at night they go home and they do it against us individually as well to make a profit. They're all just in basically the same type of thing. Now, a couple of years ago, the FBI made this broad announcement. They said that the ATM system was vulnerable to being infiltrated by criminals, and they may get access to bank accounts. So keep a close eye on the money in your bank account, because the criminals had the ability to create phony ATM cards, and without having the passcode necessary or the PIN number, they may be able to withdraw money from ATM machines around the world. It never came to fruition in the United States in the way that the FBI described, but they wanted people to be alert about it and check your bank accounts carefully. So they didn't say who was responsible. The FBI never said that. But I knew immediately when I heard this from a couple of years ago that it was an international criminal, not somebody in the United States, because the people that hack in the United States aren't nearly as talented as the international criminals. In fact, when people in the US want to steal money from an ATM network, they get a forklift and lift the ATM machine off of its moorings, take it home and try to break into it that way. That's what they do in the US. That's a domestic criminal. International hackers figure out how to get away through sophisticated hacking techniques. So our agenda for today, with that is just a little bit of a backdrop, is how do we get to the situation we are today with ransomware? How it happens, and then what we can do to stay safe. All right, so let's start off with how we got here. I'm going to go back in time a little bit, 7 years ago. I've always wanted to say that in a speech. Anyway, 87 years ago, criminals used to kidnap people in real life, right? They kidnap them, hold them for ransom. Back in 1934, there was even a fill-in-the-blank ransom note. All you had to do was fill in your name of your victim, and you'd have your completed ransom note. So back then, you didn't even have to read or write very well, and you could commit these attacks. against people, kidnapping people. Now, today, it's basically the same thing. Criminals have copied the technique from 87 years ago when they write ransom notes or commit ransom attacks. You don't even have to be good at that. You don't even have to have the skills. You can hire someone to do that, as ransomware has become a service. And the same type of note appears on a computer screen. You're never going to see your files alive again if you don't pay up. Or in the case of 1934, you'll never see your victim alive again. Same technique, just copied into the future, and that's what we're experiencing today. An old-fashioned crime with modern spin to it. The first known computer ransomware attack took place way back in 1987. It was done by a researcher who was involved in AIDS research, and he sent a floppy disk. You remember those 8-inch floppy disks, going way back in time now? And he sent it to colleagues in medical research with the basically instructions on the disk. Insert it into your drive and use the DOS or DOS commands to download the programs, and then immediately locked up the computer files of the people that were victimized by this. Then he asked for money to unlock those files, but not a one-time payment. He wanted recurring payments. So not only did he invent ransomware, he invented software as a service and a recurring payment system, which was just beginning at that time as well. Anyway, we've come a long way since that type of attack. I don't even think he knew he was really committing a ransomware attack as we know it today. And then the growth of Bitcoin made ransomware attacks just a lot easier to collect the money. If you bought Bitcoin way back in 2010, you probably wouldn't even be watching this session today. You may be on an island. Maybe you would own an island, depending on how much Bitcoin that you bought back then. But the use of digital currency has made it more difficult for law enforcement authorities to track the illegal payments that are made to the people who are holding companies hostage. In 2016, there was a major event. I call it like a seminal event that occurred because a hospital in Southern California was victimized by a ransomware attack. And they announced to the world that we are paying $17,000, which is a pittance compared to what's paid today, in Bitcoin equivalent of that amount. We're paying it to get our computers back because we have patient lives at risk, which was a reasonable decision, I guess. But with $17,000 paid, that announced to the world that we will pay money to get computers back. And that was kind of the beginning when criminals realized that, hey, this is an easy crime to commit. I don't have to steal files. I don't have to exfiltrate data. All I have to do is lock them up on their own computer. And with people not being trained and clicking on phishing emails and doing all the things that could cause this to happen, easy for the criminals to commit these crimes. Another crime that occurred in California was where the ticket system was locked up for the municipal transit system in San Francisco around Thanksgiving Day weekend in 2016. Now, if you were in San Francisco, you wanted to ride the Muni, as they call it back then, you didn't have to buy a ticket because they let you ride for free because you couldn't buy a ticket as their system was locked up. Again, more of a nuisance in this case than what we're seeing today, but certainly a major ransomware attack against the city service. Now, as a result of that attack, you might be interested to know that a state senator in California decided that he was going to introduce a bill to make ransomware illegal. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, wasn't ransomware illegal to begin with? Well, there was a crime at the federal level involving ransomware attacks that made them illegal, but there was none in California that specifically outlined that. So he introduced this bill. And funny part about introducing the bill, he had a fact sheet regarding that particular bill on his computer, and it was encrypted by a ransomware attack on his own computer. As you can see, the extension of the Word document there. They couldn't even read the file anymore. So the criminals weren't asking for money. He actually tweeted about this. The criminals weren't asking for money. They were just making a statement. They're saying, you can make all the laws you want. It's not going to stop us, right? So we're going to be able to do whatever we want anyway. That was their statement. And of course, they struck back many times after that law was passed in California. Over the years, criminals started to target city services, even to a greater extent. The city of Baltimore was hit more than once. Atlanta was hit. at least one time. And in this particular instance, when Baltimore was attacked, all the city services were down and they basically had to revert back to manual. If you're a business person and you are trying to run an operation, whether it's a school, a hospital, a meat processor, a pipeline, you can't revert back to manual. I mean, that's going to put you back in the 1960s and you're not going to be able to conduct business, as we've seen that play out in the news. After that, a new iteration of ransomware attacks occurred. The first known ransomware attack that was using the internet to spread was back in 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack, started in West Africa and spread to thousands and not hundreds of thousands of computers throughout the world in a matter of minutes. And it was basically took advantage of computer systems that were not updated to the current standards. And it took advantage of that vulnerability, and we had many, many computers locked up around the world. The follow-up to that was the Petya ransomware attack. And Federal Express has a subsidiary, works in London, known as TNT Express. And in their annual report for that year, came out in January the following year, they said we were affected significantly by this. So the point I want to make with this was this, is that it's not the ransom that you have to pay. In fact, with the WannaCry ransomware attack, they're only asking for $300. But it's the downtime. It's the time you're out of business and the effect it'll have on your business and potentially other businesses in a supply chain if it is that type of attack. It cost TNT Express over $400 million. This comes right out of their annual report. You can't make this stuff up. Now, Merck was victimized by the Petya ransomware attack also in June of 2017. That was a major downtime situation for them, $1.3 billion in sales losses and remediation, manufacturing and remediation expenses back in 2017. Again, it's not the ransom. That's nothing compared to the downtime, the recovery time, the remediation time from ransomware attacks. Criminals don't have a conscience. They started going after the healthcare system. When COVID hit, especially, they knew how vulnerable healthcare organizations were in general, but when COVID hit, it was even more so because they were strapped in trying to treat COVID patients and deal with the crisis. They didn't let up. They actually picked up their action against healthcare organizations, knowing that they may be more likely to collect a ransom during the crisis time of COVID. And you can look at all the headlines around the world at this time when it was at the peak of COVID. And you can just conclude with one comment that one person said in regard to this. It's just not safe to be a patient in a hospital when their computers are down. And truly, they move people to other hospitals and it creates issues with patient safety. And more recently, there was an announcement that someone had died because of a ransomware attack because they could not get effective treatment in the particular hospital they were at. So they're hitting healthcare. They're also hitting education. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And supply chain attacks, the most popular organizations to be attacked more recently for with regard to ransomware. So I want to stop here and pause and ask a question that maybe to get you to ponder something. Who's behind these attacks? We already kind of alluded to that a little bit. But I want to point out that not all these people get away from justice. I use this example of this hooded person to illustrate the unknown criminal that may be in a foreign country that's involved in these attacks that really never gets caught. But there was one that did get caught. And I'm going to unhood this guy for just a second. Now, he was not responsible for a ransomware attack. He was responsible for creating malware, the Cronus malware, which stole specifically bank login credentials. Marcus Hutchins was his name. I thought you might appreciate this story because sometimes the FBI does get these people if they come to the United States. Now, the FBI had a warrant for his arrest for creating this Cronus malware, which stole bank-in login credentials. He was in the UK, and it wasn't clear he was going to make it to the United States and be extradited there to face charges. But he came to the United States willingly in 2017 to attend the hacker conference. That's right, he's a hacker. Why not attend the hacker conference, which takes place in Las Vegas every year? So he's in Las Vegas attending the conference. The FBI's kind of eyeing him, watching what he's doing, seeing who his colleagues are and trying to get some leads on this guy. And then after, when he was getting ready to leave, all that the FBI had all that information to say, well, now it's time before he leaves the country, we're going to pick him up. They picked him up at the Las Vegas airport. and they placed him under arrest. Took him in a room to the side of the main terminal, and they gave him his Miranda warnings. Now, you may have heard about these warnings. You may have heard them on TV. You know, you have to give someone their constitutional rights when you interview a person, when you're going to question them and they're in custody, and he was in custody, they're going to question him. Gave him his rights. He gave a full statement to the FBI. Actually, they got a lot of information from him about his hacking activities. Now, when he was transferred up to Wisconsin in federal court, where he was facing the charges there, he was the judge was asked by his lawyer to throw out his statement that he gave to the FBI at the Las Vegas airport. So, you know, throw this out, because he wasn't able to give a statement. He was basically suffering from a 4-day partying-induced hangover from being at the Las Vegas hacker conference in 2017, which took place over a 4-day period. And a judge, you can't make this stuff up, said, "How sorry, a hangover does not render you unable to waive your Miranda rights." So the statement stood. The FBI learned a lot about him, and he did face the charges for his particular crimes. He was also the guy that stopped the WannaCry ransomware attack when he figured out how it was working, and he set up a web domain for $12 that brought it to a screeching halt when the WannaCry attack hit his web domain. So he's also responsible for being a white hat hacker and saving other individuals or businesses that would have been affected post his computer being hit or his website being hit. It's not just one guy or groups of people. It's whole organizations that are after our money, and they even have people that scout out for high revenue targets. You know, they're organized just like a Fortune 500 company. They even have public relations. They have people that talk to the media when they call them. They have people that talk to the victims when they call them, that are negotiators for these organizations. But they first have to scout out the particular victims. And you think about just going back about a year or so, when schools in the United States were going to remote learning. You could take a look at this news article that was put out by a particular school district. They're distributing 48,000 Chromebooks to their students and trying to get those up and running so students can have remote learning. This is all public information. You can imagine a scout looking at this and saying, you know, school districts in the United States already are strapped for IT resources. They're distributing all these Chromebooks, trying to get those set up. I bet they're not going to pay too much attention to being victimized by a ransomware attack and finding ways to stay safe from that particular attack. So they target people specifically based on what may be the most successful type of attacks. Most of these attacks come from the nations that you see on the screen, the ones that have been identified as the most prolific countries that launch attacks against the United States involving ransomware. And having known this, the Department of Treasury came out with about a year ago, basically the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC for short, said, you know, we're thinking about, if you pay ransom to one of those countries that's on a sanctioned list, you may be fined. You may be fined specifically for paying ransom, and maybe that will help prevent some of the companies from paying ransom to begin with, which just emboldens them and increases the problem. So if you look at the list of the countries that are sanctioned, that OFAC referred to, it's pretty much the same countries. So basically what they're saying is, you pay ransom to a country if you're victimized by a ransomware attack, you're going to get fined. Now, that hasn't come to fruition yet. It was just kind of an idea that they floated out there. I'm not sure where that is right now in the scheme of things. But one event that occurred more recently was in June of this year, when President Biden met with Putin in Geneva, Switzerland. And he basically appeased Putin by just saying, hey, don't attack our critical infrastructures, and gave him a list of 16 critical infrastructures that they should not attack. Are you kidding me? How about not attacking us at all in any industry, not just critical infrastructures? This type of appeasement, it shows you the situation that we're in today. It reminds me of 1939 when Hitler was appeased. You could take this part of Czechoslovakia, but you can't take the rest of it. Oh yeah, we promise we won't take anymore. I mean, this is where we're at today when it comes to cyber attacks. Now that we talked about how we got there, let's talk about specifically of how it could happen. Before I go on to that section, I like to answer a question that people often ask me when I do in-person events. They'll say, Jeff, when did you join the FBI? 1988 is the year. This is the year I joined the Bureau. I have a picture of me getting my credentials back then. You might be wondering, is that some undercover guy going into the FBI with the dark wig and the mustache? That's me back then. I'd be a terrible undercover agent, by the way. But one of the things I wanted to do when I went into the FBI was I wanted to work mob cases. I wanted to work organized crime cases. And that interest comes from my early days growing up. I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. I come from a big Italian family. There were 5 boys in my family. We had a tradition on Christmas Day. We all sat around the TV. We watched a movie on Christmas Day that looked like, on a TV that looked like this. The movie that we watched taught me about life and loyalty and how business should be conducted. And everybody thinks it's this movie, which is an okay movie to watch on a holiday, but that's not the movie that my family watched. The one that my family watched that taught me about life, loyalty, and how business should be conducted was this movie. And I know it's kind of weird, but that's my family, not me. Anyway, that got me interested in the mob. So when I got to Kansas City as a brand new FBI agent, I got to work a mob case. There's a lesson here, so watch what happens next. As Tony and Joe are talking on the phone, Tony gets a call from Joe. We have the phone tapped, and here's how it goes. Tony says, Joe, as the FBI listens, Tony says, Joe, I'm really glad you called. And Joe goes, yeah, why? And Tony goes, I got a little problem. I think the FBI is tapping my phone. And Joe goes, well, what are you going to do about it? Tony goes, well, I got a new number. So here we go, lacking any common sense. Joe goes, okay, good, give me the number. Now, Tony gets a little common sense. He says, I better not give it to you on the phone. I'll meet you for lunch and I'll give it to you then. And Joe says, well, I can't meet you for lunch. Tony says, okay, I'll give it to you now on the phone, but I'll give it to you backwards. So we proceeded to give him these 7 digits in reverse order. And what did the FBI do? We got our best cryptologist on that one right away. We had the number figured out in record time. It only took us 6 months with the powerful computers we had back in 1988. But you know, I use this example, it's a true story, not the 6-month part, but about the phone call because it illustrates a key point. How critical is common sense in everyday life when it comes to preventing fraud and ransomware attacks and cyber attacks of any sort? It's important too. We have to be careful, and we need a major strategy to teach people in organizations to be more careful where they click. The majority of these attacks occur based on unprotected systems or when people click in the wrong place. And it can happen so quickly. This is a picture of 2 rattlesnakes that I took on a nature walk one time, real nature walk when you see rattlesnakes. Anyway, I just want to point out that I would never, ever pick up a rattlesnake. But there's guys that do. They pick up rattlesnakes and they don't realize how fast that they can be bit by these snakes. And they usually end up in the hospital. And you know, the 2 most common things that are said by a guy who picks up a rattlesnake before when they pick it up: take my picture, hold my beer, and they get bit. And it happens so quickly. But that's how quickly a ransomware attacks can occur. It can happen in based on different vulnerabilities. But most of them occur, according to the FBI, are compromised systems, email phishing schemes, compromised credentials. And of those 3 things, they can all be prevented very easily with corporate training, culture of security, and basically some other protocols put into place. We'll talk about some of that in just a minute. The attack can occur when someone clicks on what seemingly is a document from a Microsoft. They enable the content and it downloads the malware and affects the network in just a matter of seconds. It can also be a trick like this. Why would someone send an attachment in a document and provide you with the password to that document if it's an encrypted document right in the email? See, that doesn't make sense either. But in this case, they're trying to get by maybe antivirus scanning systems looking for viruses and malware in attachments, but those can't open the attachment up if there is a password connected to that. But the person in the organization may still open it up, and that causes, of course, the attack. How quickly it could happen. Could be a resume sent to somebody in human resources, dropped from a Dropbox link. The encryption is the next step, and then you look at your files, and of course you can't open them because they're all encrypted by the malware that's been used to create the ransomware attack. And then the notification comes from the criminal. They'll tell you all about cryptography and asymmetric cryptography and public keys. You don't have time for that. You're just trying to get back up and running again. And sometimes they give you a break, right? Your option one is to pay for every single system that's been encrypted, but we'll give you a volume discount. You can just pay one price and we'll unencrypt all the systems. But what people don't realize is a lot of times there's different keys for all the systems. It's not going to be as easy as putting in an decryption key and having everything automatically back to normal. Remember, remediation is a big issue. They'll even say, you can't follow us. You're not going to be able to track the Bitcoin address that was used. You're not going to be able to sit on a wallet like the FBI did in the Colonial Pipeline case, and that was successful. But most of the time, it's going to be very difficult to track this money to the criminal. And just in case you were wondering, we protect your privacy. We adhere to all the privacy rules that are being instituted by various countries around the world. They're nice. They say please. They say thank you. All they want is your money. And then afterwards, of course, customer satisfaction is so important these days. So you might even get an email that looks like this. You know, it's almost gotten to that point with ransomware attacks. It's become a business, and a business that could affect anyone, not just in business computers, but at home as well. In a recent case involving a school district, someone showed up to work one morning. They got a message that all their files were encrypted. It wasn't just the important files that were encrypted. It was servers and backup servers and everything else. They pretty much couldn't do anything. They couldn't do payroll. People couldn't sign in. People couldn't do anything involving any computer activities in the organization. The chat began between the school district. The hacker asked how many PCs need to be decrypted, and the hacker, before he even had a chance to answer the question, said, I want 50,000 for all of them. Victim said, I need to discuss it with my boss. And he said basically what we talked about earlier: don't call the police. They're going to tell you not to pay, and you'll never get your files back. You'll never see them alive again. The school board immediately approved a $50,000 payment. However, in this particular case, the victim found a backup that they were able to restore from that was not encrypted by the criminal. So good news for them. They didn't have to pay the $50,000. Another school district in Texas, they had a school district, small school district, only with 900 students, but basically everything was down. And also a $50,000 demand was made, also approved by the school board in that particular case. And you can see from this notice that they put out publicly that they announced it to basically to the world. We've been victimized by this, and school districts have been a target because of the need for them to get back up and running, and the critical student information that's involved with those victims as well. And then they also, which is kind of a new iteration of ransomware attacks, is that they're not only going to lock up computer systems, they're going to steal the information first, then lock up the computer systems. And if you don't pay a ransom, we're going to release all the information publicly. And that includes sensitive information of children, which is very a huge deal, as you can imagine, for parents. And in this particular case, the Nevada school district, a school district in the state of Nevada, refused to pay the ransom, and the records of 300,000 students was released publicly, including very personal information. So let's see how we prevent this from happening. A couple things here that we'll talk about. I'm going to turn it back over to our host. So first of all, I talked about very briefly, I talked about being able to recover from a backup like the school district was in that one particular case. But there's a term you should be familiar with if you're not already. It's an air gap backup. An air gap backup is a backup that's not physically connected to a computer network. So it has an immutable copy of all your files that you need to recover from. It's already scanned for viruses, and it can be used to recover your files so you're back up and running, and the downtime is minimal. Air gap backups are a very important way to stay safe from ransomware attacks and recover from those attacks as quickly as possible. I talked about training and talked about creating a culture of security, but it's not just about talking to employees once every 6 months or sending them bogus phishing emails to see if they respond and require remedial training. It's about talking about cybersecurity all the time, and all the meetings that take place, and all the communications that take place, reminding people how important it is, what to do and what not to do. And that also would transfer to things they do at home and help keep them safe in their environment when they get home from work as well. Creating a culture of security is a must, and most organizations don't have this culture, and that's one of the reasons why they might be victimized. Most companies have incident response plans in the event of a ransomware attack. but incident response plans in general, but do you have them in the event of a ransomware attack? What do we do, and how do we recover from that? This seems like such an obvious thing, but let me point out that this was not used in the Colonial Pipeline attack. Let me show you what the CEO said when he talked to Congress about that attack.
In the case of this particular legacy VPN, it did only have single factor authentication. It was a complicated password, so I want to be clear on that. It was not a Colonial 123 type password.
Okay, it was a complicated password. That's nice. But why did they not have multi-factor authentication that could have prevented that major attack that occurred, that locked up a pipeline and caused pretty much mayhem throughout the east coast of the United States for a short time anyway, and millions of dollars to the company? Multi-factor authentication could have prevented that from happening. And then one more thing just to point out here, and that is always keep your systems updated, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. There's some FBI documents, ransomware related documents on the FBI website. If you just go to fbi.gov, you'll see some more detailed information about some of the things that can be done to keep safe from ransomware attacks. An alert that just came out on October 18th of this year, just 3 days ago, from CISA, talks about some of the other additional methods that can be done to help stay safe from ransomware attacks. And this little box to the right, you'll see some of those methods as well. And it all revolves around things we've been talking about: strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, good training, and then some other things that they mentioned there as well. Here's the thing: a lot of companies say, hey, we'll just pay if we are victimized by a ransomware attack. That's the easiest thing to do, and that's what Colonial Pipeline did, and many other companies have done as well. Keep in mind, if you pay, you can't always recover your data. You might get put on a payers list and be victimized again before you can fortify against an attack, and it just encourages the criminals to continue to launch these attacks and emboldens them to commit more attacks. So paying is really not a good solution to ransomware, and some of where the money goes may even go to fund other criminal activity, and we don't want to be part and parcel to funding these more violent criminal activities, which the money might be used for. What does the future hold for ransomware attacks? Well, ransomware mutations. So they're not only going to lock up your data, they're actually going to steal it first, as they did with the Nevada School District, and threaten to release it unless you pay to unlock the data. Then maybe we'll choose not to release the data. Ransomware as a service has become a big deal. And if you looked at the Wall Street Journal story today that came out on their online website, it's about this. You want a job, you want to work 9-hour days, you get an hour for lunch, only pays $800 a month. But if you live in Russia, maybe that's a little bit more money than you'd be making. This is what's happening today with a company that's been advertising for tech employees under the name of Bastion Secure, excuse me. And actually, the Wall Street Journal determined it's actually part of Fin7, which is a well-known hacking group advertising to get employees to help them commit more ransomware attacks. Wall Street Journal website today, check it out. In the Colonial Pipeline case, that was the situation where we had ransomware as a service, and that particular company that was involved in that, or group of people that were involved in that, had made a lot of money providing ransomware as a service. And then we got more attacks on critical infrastructures, industrial control systems, and we saw what happened with the JBS attack as well, just a few months ago. The Colonial Pipeline attack, talked about that earlier. And the situation we're in here with people that we can't get at, the FBI can't get at them, so there's no consequences, there's no deterrence, and the crimes continue. Some are even protected by the government. I want to end on a high note here. Sometimes people are caught. This guy was not responsible for ransomware attacks. A major criminal known as Hush Puppy from Nigeria was involved in stealing login credentials or hijacking email accounts and wire transferring money to his account. He made multi-millions of dollars. He used that money to buy expensive cars, his Bentley and his Rolls Royce. He had 425,000 Instagram followers, and he went to Dubai to just kind of hang out, and the FBI was able to nab him there, as there was cooperation from the Dubai police, and he was taken into custody, and he's facing now multiple years in prison as he is back in the United States being extradited from Dubai. And there he is there being arrested. So we do get some of these people, but when it comes to the ransomware attacks, it's been far and few between. A lot of people say, why can't we retaliate like we would have been able to back in the days of the Cold War, mutually assured destruction was the mantra that was used. If the Soviet Union launched an attack against the United States, we would all be able to respond in kind before the attack was even complete. Both countries would be destroyed. That's what prevented a nuclear war. Why can't we do that with cybercrime? Well, because we can't turn off the lights in Beijing and ask for a ransom to be paid to turn the lights back on, right? We can't steal their intellectual property. It's 20 years behind the United States' intellectual property for the most part. And we can't sanction these countries because most of them are already sanctioned out. There's not much more that you can do. The only solution is prevention and some of the things that we talked about today to help stay safe, a culture of security, and using all the computer protocols that are necessary to keep our systems safe. And I'm just going to end it right there. There's some information. Please feel free to contact me if I can help you in any way by email and or phone. And I'm going to turn it back over to our host to see if we have any questions that we might be able to handle in the next few minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. That was amazing. A couple of questions that we have that we've received from the audience. I do think the U.S. government should get more involved in particularly the ransomware issue that we have in these days.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Let me go back to the question. All right. Yep. I don't see anything in the chat. And
we do receive questions from.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So you're asking me if the government should get more involved?
Yeah, if the government should get more involved, and particularly in ransomware. We know that the government's involved in different areas in cybersecurity, but just to give a different message to society, just to participate a bit more.
I think only in finding ways to encourage companies to be more secure and to maybe sanction countries that are victimized by ransomware in a way that they're not paying ransomware so easily. And maybe that's a good idea because because paying it is just increasing the problem. There's easy ways to stay safe from these attacks, and it comes with what I just talked about in this event today. So our government needs to probably say, if you're not doing these things, then maybe we need to step up enforcement from the victim's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's one of the question on our poll right now is exactly about that. Exactly. If you believe that people should pay or not, we're asking that to the audience just to see how they feel safer, or how would they feel safer around their information once the time comes when they have this ransomware attack, and what do they do? Just to clarify, what's your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion on that is, if a company was victimized and they had no other way to get back up and running, I mean, the choice is don't pay money and then try to reconstruct your files and try to take weeks or months to get back up to where you were. And in the meantime, everyone else that depends on you as a company is affected by this. I would say you'd almost have to make a choice to pay the ransom, right? But that's the logical thing to do. But emotionally, I would say that's the wrong thing to do, because again, that just encourages the attacks, and it just causes more attacks to occur, emboldens the criminals, and it causes more people to be involved in that, which creates the growing crime problem that we have today.
Yeah.